And now, please welcome UiPath Senior Director, Product Management, Taki Joffrey.
Wow. Hey, everyone. Hope everybody's enjoying Tech Ed. We have a fantastic session for you. Next, I actually have the distinct honor to interview two eminent experts in the field of Agentic AI. And I think we'll all learn something together. It's going to be a nice, relaxed conversation where I'll just ask them a few questions. And we'll be talking about what it actually means to be agentic from their perspective, and what that means to everybody in this room in the modern enterprise. So without further ado, let me please join me in welcoming my first guest. She's a professor at UC Berkeley, where she works on human-computer interaction. Let's welcome Professor Sarah Chasins.
Hello, hello.
Welcome,
Hello.
Sarah. How are you?
I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you. Please take a seat. And next, my friend, he leads AI strategy for us here at UiPath, Dr. Ed Chalice.
Hi, Taki. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Welcome, Ed.
Cool.
Have a seat. OK, so let's just get settled in. And I'm going to ask the first question, which I'm sure is on everybody's minds. This entire conference, we've been talking about what agents are, agentic automation. We saw the agent builder, so many things. So let's kick it off with Sarah. As the professor in the room, what does it mean to be agentic?
Yeah, so the basic idea is to have an AI that is interacting with the world for you, interacting with the digital environment for you. It's using tools. So it's not just talking to you. It's doing something that actually affects something else out there in the world. Typically, it understands something about the context. It can use the context, process the context to make some decisions for you. And it has memory, instructions. It has a goal that it's trying to achieve. So maybe it is putting events on your calendar, or messaging your colleagues, or booking hotel rooms, right? That's the kind of thing that you're expecting an agent to do for you. And since it is interacting with the world, it's using tools for you, it does end up having a lot in common with process automation. In fact, even in academia, where we really love to make sort of definitions for things, we don't have this really crisp definition of where process automation ends and agentic AI begins. It's best to basically think of it as a spectrum. And so over here on the process automation side of the spectrum, we're giving these really, really crisp specifications. We're saying really specifically what are the instructions that we want you, the machine, to follow, right? Talking it through step by step, where we're not really giving it space to make any decisions for us. We're saying at X time, under X circumstances, we're going to have you do this specific thing, right? We're really not giving it a lot of room to make choices. On the other hand, over here on agentic AI, we're saying, OK, I'm going to give you some vaguer instructions, maybe even expressed in English, and I'm going to expect you to make more of those decisions for me. And typically right now, when folks use that term agentic AI, they mean a program that is actually using basically generative AI, so the same underlying technology that is inside the large language models you've probably heard about, ChatGPT and all the rest. It's using that generative AI technology to be making some of those decisions for you. And this is probably going to give you a pretty good idea of when you want to reach for process automation versus when you want to reach for agentic AI, if you know exactly what you want to have happen, if you are ready to give those really specific instructions, if it would be bad if anything other than what you want to have happen happened. That's when you're going to be going ahead and reaching for process automation. On the other hand, if you're like, okay, this is kind of a more laid-back situation, it's okay for the computer to be making more decisions for me, maybe then I'm going to be going ahead and reaching for agentic AI. So if I want to make sure the computer pays Ed X dollars when specific thing Y happens, and it had better be exactly X dollars, and it better be this very specific thing Y, and I have a really crisp definition of that, amazing, fantastic, I'm going for process automation. On the other hand, if I want to send Ed a congratulatory message on Slack when Y happens, I'm maybe feeling a little more laid back about that. Maybe I go ahead and reach for agentic AI in that situation.
That's great. So let's take it over to Ed then. We have many people in this room who are wondering what this means for them in their jobs. So what do you think this means for the world of work and the modern enterprise?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of great question. So, exactly as Sarah said, this I think of agency as a kind of a matter of degree, a kind of spectrum. So all of the automations built so far kind of sit at the left-hand side of that spectrum, where the process, the task, the sequence is completely defined by logic and kind of completely deterministic. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have kind of complete agency, right? Total flexibility, no control, no real guidance. And what we're kind of, the kind of coming years will be us kind of increasingly building more and more automations that move from that left-hand side of the spectrum, kind of deeper into that full kind of agentic world. But what agents give us is an ability to take on and automate fundamentally new processes. So tasks that we just could not automate in the past. And there are a number of different categories of things that we couldn't automate. So I think there are tasks we couldn't automate because the data, the input data, which defined the automation was too messy or too varied or changed a little bit on each run. So you have that kind of input variability challenges that sometimes constrain what you can automate. You also have, as Daniel said, I think yesterday, a whole bunch of problems where maybe it's easy to define the happy path, but there's actually so many sub-cases, there's so many branches to the tree. It's really hard to manage that complexity with a kind of purely procedural, rules-based approach. So agents help us there when the control flow is complex. And then I think agents also really help us, what people call the long tail of automation opportunities. There's typically, everyone has in their working day thousands of tasks. Each one doesn't take up too much time, isn't repeated too many times, but in aggregate, all those different tasks actually put a lot of burden on you and your team. So I think agentic automation has a lot to offer for those three cases, and it just, the bottom line is it just massively increases what we can automate.
That's fantastic.
But I think it is really important to remember that the models underpinning this agents is generative AI, right? And in one respect, generative AI is completely amazing. Where we are today is like unbelievable, really, over kind of 3 years. Generative AI can do so many things that previously only humans can do. But generative AI still can't do so much that humans can do. So, it's less imaginative than us. It might be able to write a poem quickly, but lateral thinking isn't as good. It has less kind of real-world knowledge, less specialized contextual knowledge that drives your business. And it's not as good at reasoning as we are, right? So generative AI is very powerful, but also not as good as humans. So the future of work, really, is how we can bring the best of these different components together seamlessly. The best of agents to do those tasks that previously only humans could do, automate that. Robots for that high frequency, those kind of processes where you can't have any kind of non-determinism in them. You really need reliability, stability, total control. And people as the kind of overseers, the managers, the people making the judgment calls, working across those kind of processes.
That's great, yeah, and I think there's just so much innovation in this space that it's great to think about it like that there's limitations as well as lots of opportunity. And I think that's a really great segue, maybe back to you, Sarah. As we think about all these capabilities that Ed is talking about, if somebody's thinking of landing an agent and making it actually successful, like what are the components you think, or what are the key characteristics of an agent that's actually going to be successful in a business or for users?
I think the big must-have at this point is actually to democratize access. It's been really interesting, even just over the last, honestly, year or so, seeing all the research that's been coming out, studying how real people actually use these generative AI technologies, especially I'm thinking a lot about how they're using them for getting access to programming. And we've been figuring out, oh, it is not doing what we thought, which has been really fascinating. It's a really hot topic, so a lot of people are studying it. I think Molly Feldman's work on this topic has been especially solid, but again, hot topic, lots of labs looking at this. And so the evidence is really piling up that the situation is extremely different for programmers and people who know how to talk like programmers versus for non-programmers. For programmers and people who know how to talk like programmers, we're definitely seeing generative AI, text box AIs like ChatGPT, we're seeing that is helping them get access to programs. For non-programmers, unfortunately, it is helping much less, which is really surprising in light of what a lot of folks thought at sort of the beginning of this process, where folks thought that this was going to immediately democratize access to programming. Thought that these text box AIs, that was it, we were there. Whereas in fact, what it's looking like from the research is that this may even be widening the technology gap, right? We may be seeing an even bigger gulf between the technological haves and the technological have-nots. So that's kind of alarming. And in addition to seeing that from the research, the other big thing that we're seeing is why that's happening. So why the situation is so different for non-programmers versus for programmers. And it looks like it's basically two core things, right? So number one is a huge one, problem decomposition. It turns out that when a programmer is using a text box AI, they are still the one doing that problem decomposition. They're not walking up to the text box, giving this vague sort of high-level description of what they want to have happen, and the tool's coming back and saying, okay, you need component A, component B, component C. It's not happening like that. Instead, the programmer is still the one doing that really difficult task of breaking the problem down into its component subparts, and then handing off those components to the AI. So that's great and all, but unfortunately, non-programmers just haven't been trained in how to do that.
Yeah,
and so
breaking down problems and stuff, yeah.
Of course, right? Like that's part of the training to become a programmer. Why would we expect that a non-programmer can just sit up and do that immediately? And so instead, we need a tool that's going to guide us through it, right? It's going to walk you through, okay, here's how you break this problem down. It's going to give you the steps in order. It's going to break it down for you. So that's problem one, that's sort of challenge one. We have to do something smarter than the text box AIs about problem decomposition. Challenge number two really comes down to understanding the programs that we're getting back, building trust in the programs that we're getting back, right? If I'm a programmer, I can look through 100 lines of code in some programming language and figure out if it's doing what I want, figure out if I'm happy with what it's doing, figure out if it's anywhere close to what I actually need it to be doing, and I can figure out if I trust it. But what if I'm not a programmer, right? What am I supposed to do faced with this massive wall of something that I don't understand at all? How am I supposed to build trust in that or figure out if it's doing anything like what I want it to do, especially given that this is something that's going out and affecting the world? I'd better really trust this. Right? So that's a really hard task to build up that trust. So those are sort of the core big two. It's that problem decomposition and building trust, building understanding. But of course, if we break it down, if we go deeper on either of those two, we're going to find a bunch of sort of smaller sub-challenges within. So if you think a little bit more about building trust, about understanding the programs, a big thing there is I might sometimes want the program to come back to me and say, ooh, I need help here. I'm not sure what to do next. Please, human, step in, right? And so having that human in the loop interaction is is really powerful for building trust and for getting agents that are actually doing the things we want them to be doing, but it's not immediately obvious how that process should work, right? And that's certainly not something that's happening in the context of the text box AIs. So we need some other tool, some other structure that is going to be thoughtfully designed to support that kind of interaction, getting the programs to come back and ask the human when we need to get them in the loop.
Yeah, and I think that kind of that problem decomposition thing is super important, and actually is a really valuable way to actually achieve trust as well. Right?
100%.
So decomposition leads to high performant, trustworthy agents.
Yep.
And I think one of the kind of, when you hear this word agent, I think you immediately jump to thinking an agent is a kind of one-to-one equivalent to a human. Like you have customer support agents, IT service desk agents. I'll get a kind of AI agent. You really want an agent to be really single-minded, right? Hyper-focused. So I think say you were going to try and improve your IT service desk with an agent, right? You might build an agent whose sole job is to read every ticket as it comes in and make one decision. Is this high urgency or medium or low urgency? And that's his only job, right? And then you might build a second agent that reads those tickets and understands what applications is this ticket related to. And then you might have a third agent which would allocate the tickets based on priority, based on application, to a specialist agent that can do FAQs for each of those kind of combinations. And it's that single-mindedness which actually allows you to very simply measure how well it's performing. So you have that evaluation page in Agent Builder.
Yep.
If you make the focus of the agent tight, you can very quickly kind of validate it, test it. And that specialization then means you really need tight controlled workflows and tight orchestration. And that's why orchestration is so critical. And that handoff between agents, which is really simple to achieve, but then that critical handoff between humans and agents, which is that final kind of touch point of trust and control.
Yeah, it's what's that famous tweet? English is the hottest programming language.
Yeah.
But it's or natural language, but it turns out it's also ambiguous. So I think that's where these concepts of specialization, single-mindedness, as you called it, and having these really focused agents that do focused things really well, and then we evaluate them on how well they do these focused things well, and then we orchestrate them.
And those are the talents and skills every automation team has, right? So it's a kind of natural home.
Yeah.
For building this stuff.
Hopefully that's resonating with a lot of people in this room. I think that's fantastic. So I think UiPath brings a lot to the table here. I'm sure, Sarah, you've also tried, our low-code studio. That's from a human-computer interaction perspective, probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah, something to think about. And I especially liked your sort of thoughts on how that's a different skill set. Programmers are trained to decompose problems, but maybe not everybody else is. And like Ed said, maybe everybody else, it's easy to think of just, I have a customer support agent, so maybe I should just have an agent that does that human's job. So I think this is fantastic. I think we can maybe just summarize a lot of the things that we've talked about in this conference related to all of these concepts. UiPath, of course, has fantastic human-in-the-loop capabilities that you folks talked about in terms of trusting the outcomes of these agents. We have orchestration capabilities to sort of tie together these teams of robots and humans. And then, of course, there's that foundation of trust, right? We have the LLM trust layer, the security management, everything like that. So I think, any other thoughts, folks, from you?
I think maybe one last thing is I think sometimes often people think about agentic as really like, they confuse it, I think, with this kind of ChatGPT interface.
They do,
right?
they do.
And it's so much more than that. That interface is an incredibly powerful kind of way of interacting with software, but is not suitable for all applications. So Autopilot for everyone is a really great kind of way in, but I don't want those two things to be conflated. An agent can be really kind of back office in a way. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really coming down to thinking again about that spectrum, right? On the one hand, the programs where you've made the decisions, you're not leaving the program a lot of space to have to make decisions for you, as opposed to when you are going ahead and handing off more of that decision making to the tool. That, I think, is at the core of Agentic, rather than whether it looks like a text box. Because again, those text box AIs have all the problems that we just chatted about, and that's not the only way to get access to this powerful generative AI technology.
Yeah, like these conversational experiences are fantastic because everybody knows how to use them. Everybody knows how to, I don't know, message a friend. So messaging an agent is just natural, right? But as I love what you said, Ed. It's not the only experience you can have for an agent. You can have an agent be completely ambient or without any experience at all, just reading some events and processing them in an agentic fashion and maybe writing a record by itself. So I think there's just so much to do here, so much to say. But I think what I'll just conclude on is just as a reminder, perhaps for the audience. Hopefully, you found this entire conversation as fascinating as I did. These are very, very deep topics. We could go in a lot more detail. I think all three of us are here. Sarah's here. Ed is here. If you find us later walking the halls, please reach out. Happy to talk some more. Here are the announcements up on screen that we have made in this conference. This is a slide from the keynote yesterday. So we have, Agent Builder. We have more demos of that later today. So you can actually try building some of these agents yourself. We'll have the agent catalog, a lot of these pre-built agents that you can get started with. You can customize the user experience of these agents, as I was saying, with these apps. So they don't all have to be conversational, although conversational is great as well. And then, all these orchestration capabilities, et cetera. So I think this is just a good place to end. We have a lot of great sessions for you to attend today. Please do attend. People put a lot of work into them. I hope you'll find them super useful. And here's the QR code. We'll leave it up on screen for a little while. Please take a picture. You can sign up for a preview of the Agent Builder. Just like to say thank you to Sarah and Ed for joining me. Thank you folks for your time.
Thanks so much. This was fun.